It wasn't a school meeting this time. No principal with their careful posture. No laminated posters behind a desk reminding us to choose kindness. No counselor pretending to care about what Ethan was going through. I'd been in those rooms before, watching my wife shrink beside me while the staff smiled politely. Not at me but around me. Always the same glance, the same patronizing tilt of the head. "We appreciate you coming." Like they were talking to a stand-in, not a parent. No, this time it wasn't school. It was worse. It was dinner. A big family dinner at a colonial farmhouse in rural Connecticut. White clapboard siding, gravel driveway, oak trees old enough to remember war. Sarah's cousin owned the place. Big into fireplaces and restoration aesthetics. Barnwood floors, polished silverware, enough candles on the table to summon the dead. Everyone dressed like it was Thanksgiving, even though it was July. I wore a button-down I hadn't touched since our last anniversary. Brought a bottle of wine that cost too much to impress people who still looked at me like I was borrowing Sarah's last name. The invitation came 3 days earlier. Sarah said it was just family, just dinner. She used that word the way people use fine right before a relationship ends. Just dinner. Just family. Just sit there, smile, nod along. But I knew the truth even before the first course. We all did. This wasn't a celebration. It was a tribunal. The real menu was rules, money, and who actually had a say. And I still thought I had one. Sarah said the boys would be there. Ethan, 20 now, home from college for the summer. Miles, 18, just graduated. Still drunk on the freedom he thought he'd earned. Both from her first marriage. Both still carried their father's last name like a shield. I knew they'd be cold, always were, but I thought maybe, just maybe, with extended family around, they'd play nice. Fake it like the rest of us. I was wrong. The house was full when we arrived. Laughter rang off the walls like it belonged there. People shook hands, hugged, talked over one another. I walked in carrying the wine and got 3 nods and a grunt. No one took the bottle. I set it down myself. I've never seen a room full of people so good at making you feel like you wandered into the wrong house without ever saying a word. Sarah disappeared the moment we stepped inside, folded into her cousin's orbit like a bead of water joining a stream. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, looking around the room I'd helped pay for. New windows, refinished floors. A summer's worth of labor poured into the bones of a house that didn't know my name. I didn't see Ethan or Miles right away. I thought maybe they were upstairs, hiding from the noise. Turns out they were just waiting. Dinner was served at a table long enough to host a wedding. 15 seats. Candles flickering between the plates. Bowls passed like communion. Everyone sat where they were expected to, no discussion. I was placed at the far end, near the French doors. 1 seat down from Miles, across from Sarah. Ethan took the seat next to her. He didn't look at me when he sat down. The meal started light. Sarah's uncle made jokes about the price of gas. Her aunt talked about her knee surgery like it was an epic poem. People nodded, smiled, chewed. But underneath the pleasantries was the real thing. The wait, the silence everyone knew was coming. We were all waiting for the moment the conversation turned. And when it did, it didn't come with fireworks. Came with a sentence. Ethan said it first. His voice low, steady. No emotion. No heat. Just facts like he was reading from a script. You don't get to decide. That was it. No context. No lead-up. Just a declaration, planted in the middle of the table like a flag. For a second, no one reacted. It was like the words hadn't registered. Then Miles nodded beside him, chewing slowly, eyes still on his plate. "Yeah," he added. "You don't get to decide anything." Silence followed. Not a loud silence. Precise one. Like a bell had just been struck inside the walls. Sarah didn't say a word. Didn't look up. She cut another piece of her chicken and kept eating. Like nothing had happened. Like her sons hadn't just pulled the floor out from under me in front of her entire family. I looked down the table, waiting for someone to speak up. Someone to say, "Hey, that's not fair." Or even just, "Let's not do this now." But no one did. Eyes dropped. Forks clinked. Conversation resumed like nothing had shifted. like I hadn't just been erased in real time. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't confrontation. It was erasure. Quiet. Surgical. A clean cut. They didn't scream me out of the room. They made me invisible in it. I sat there chewing the same bite of food for 2 full minutes, wondering when my presence had stopped meaning anything. Wondering how many years I'd spent thinking I was earning something. A place, a voice, a seat at the head of the table, when in truth I'd been background noise, a utility, a wallet with a face. My fork trembled slightly when I set it down. No one noticed. Not Ethan. Not Miles. Not even Sarah. Years of driving them to soccer games, paying for school trips, sitting in the ER with Miles after he broke his wrist snowboarding, because his real dad couldn't make it. Years of helping Ethan through algebra homework he refused to do, only to be told later he never needed help. Every birthday party, every vacation, every last-minute emergency. All of it reduced to one sentence: you don't get to decide. I realized, in that moment, that they hadn't said it to challenge me. They'd said it because they believed it, because in their eyes it was already true. And Sarah, her silence screamed louder than any insult ever could. This wasn't about a single comment. This was the final confirmation of something I had suspected for years but never wanted to face. I was never part of this family. Not really. I was just the man who showed up and never left. The man who filled the gaps when their father disappeared. The one who kept the lights on and the pantry stocked and the cars running. But never the one they would call dad. Never the one they would defend. I felt the weight of it settle over me like dust on an old chair. Unshaken, unmoved, long forgotten. I thought back to the first Christmas we spent together. Ethan was 12. He didn't speak to me once, but when he opened the new gaming system I had saved for months to buy, he smiled. I remember thinking that smile was the beginning of something, that maybe it would bloom into trust, then into warmth, and maybe someday into love. But that smile was just the flicker of a child receiving. Not a sign of connection, just a transaction. How many moments like that had I mistaken for progress? I looked at Sarah across the table. Her hair fell in front of her face as she reached for the salt. She didn't brush it back. She didn't meet my eyes. She just kept eating. And I knew. She had heard them. Of course she had. But she wasn't surprised. She wasn't offended. She was resigned. As if this had been settled long ago, and I was the only one still clinging to an outdated script. I sat back in my chair and looked around the table again. No one met my gaze. Not one face turned toward me. 15 people and I was air. That's when the first real crack split open inside me. Not loud, not sudden, just the quiet fracture of something long under pressure finally giving way. I felt my throat tighten, not from sadness, not from anger, but from recognition. The kind of recognition that changes everything. I had been holding on to a role that didn't exist. And now, finally, I could feel it loosening its grip on me. I didn't leave. Not right away. That's the part people never understand. They imagine it as a storm out, a plate shattered, a final shout echoing down the hall. But it wasn't like that. Not for me. Not that night. I stayed. I sat there while they passed the salad bowl like nothing had been said. While Ethan laughed at some joke his cousin made about bad Wi-Fi. While Miles scrolled through his phone under the table, smirking every now and then at a screen I didn't belong to. I sat with my spine straight and my hands folded in my lap. I chewed when I had to. I swallowed when it was expected. I said nothing, because the truth had already been spoken, and it hadn't come from my mouth. You don't get to decide. The words were still echoing in my skull like a bell that never stopped ringing. I replayed it over and over, not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. Because each repetition carved it deeper into bone. Ethan hadn't yelled it. He hadn't thrown his fork across the table or stormed out like a child. He had delivered it the way men deliver a verdict. Flat, final, impersonal. Like it was already decided. Like I was the only one who hadn't been informed. And Sarah, God Sarah, had just let it land. Hadn't lifted her head. Hadn't cleared her throat. Hadn't even blinked. That silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I thought maybe she'd say something later, when the dishes were cleared, when we were driving home, when the night was behind us and the silence couldn't be ignored. But we weren't driving home. We were staying the night. There were too many guests, too many glasses of wine poured too early. One of Sarah's cousins had offered us the guest room upstairs, and she accepted without looking at me. She always did that, volunteered both of us like we were a single unit. But that night it felt different. It felt like she was accepting the terms Ethan had laid out. I wasn't a father. I wasn't a voice. I was just the plus one. And plus ones didn't get to object. After dessert, people drifted to the back porch. Someone brought out a Bluetooth speaker. Old songs. Classic rock. The kind that sound warm even when the lyrics are cruel. I stood in the kitchen and watched Sarah laugh with her sister, her hand on a wine glass, her body turned away from mine. The boys were gone. Upstairs, probably, or off somewhere outside pretending they were too old for family. I had a moment to leave. No one would have noticed. I could have slipped out the back door, walked to the edge of the property, stared out at the field until the stars reminded me how small we all are. But I stayed. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Hope. Still burning like the last coal in a cold fireplace. Or maybe it was pride. The last stupid instinct a man clings to before he admits he's lost. When it got late, people started peeling off. Sarah found me near the base of the stairs and said, "We should go to bed." Like we were still married in every sense of the word. Like nothing had happened at that table. I followed her up the stairs, our footsteps soft on old wood, her back to me the whole way. The guest room smelled like cedar and linen spray. Clean sheets, folded towels on the dresser. Everything looked untouched, like a hotel room waiting for someone more important. She got ready for bed like it was any other night. Changed into a long t-shirt, washed her face, brushed her hair. I sat on the edge of the mattress, hands between my knees, staring at the shadows on the floor. When she climbed under the blanket, I waited. Waited for the words. Waited for her to say anything. To look at me. To ask if I was okay. To acknowledge that her sons had taken a knife to my roll in front of her entire family, and she had stood there holding the plate. But she said nothing. Just turned off the lamp and rolled onto her side. And that was it. That was the final straw. Not the boys, not the sentence, not even the silence at dinner. It was her back, curved away from me in the dark. Her body choosing its direction, even in sleep. That was when I made the decision. Not with anger. Not with malice. Just with clarity. I wasn't a father in this house. I wasn't a husband in this bed. I was a placeholder. A convenient utility. And if they could erase me with silence, then I could erase myself with the same. The next morning I rose early. Showered. Dressed. Packed our overnight bag while she slept. Didn't make noise. Didn't sigh for effect. Just moved. I went downstairs and made coffee for myself. No one else. I sipped it in the silence, watching the sun crawl across the wide Connecticut lawn. Then I walked out to my truck, opened the door, and sat there for a long time. My hand hovered over the ignition, not to start the engine but to reach for my phone. I opened the banking app. There were 6 recurring transactions tied to the boys. One for Ethan's rent. One for Miles's private tutor. The rest were utilities, food cards, student loan interest. Quiet, invisible payments. The kind no one thanked you for because they never knew they existed. I canceled them all. Every single one. Then I opened the payment app tied to the smart home system. The one that kept the lights on in the house they all lived in. The one they walked through like it was a birthright. I paused. Just long enough to ask myself if I was sure. Then I tapped. Suspend account. Require verification. The screen blinked. Confirmation required from primary user to reinstate payment. That was me. Or it had been. The system noticed my absence before the people did. It wasn't loud. No explosions. No alarms. Just a digital blink in the matrix. Just a man stepping back from a machine that ran too long on unspoken labor. When I walked back inside, Sarah was still upstairs. The house smelled like burnt toast and hairspray, normal things, mundane things. I stood there in the foyer, looking at the staircase, the walls, the pictures hung slightly crooked. Photos of them. The boys. Sarah. Even their dog. Not one of me. Not a single frame. 15 years in this family and my face didn't exist on the walls. That was my answer. I walked into the kitchen, wrote a note on the back of a grocery list and left it beside the coffee maker. Thanks for dinner. The boys made themselves clear. So did you. That was all. No name. No signature. Just the end of a role I was no longer asked to play. I drove home alone. For hours. No music. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional rattle of something loose in the glove box. By the time Sarah texted, "Did you leave early?" I was already in my garage. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, but because the silence now belonged to me. The text sat unread for 2 hours before I opened it. Then another hour before I replied. Yes, I left. Nothing more. She didn't write back. Not that day. Not the next either. I kept waiting for the call. The voice. The anger. Or maybe the guilt. But silence held. Like everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first. Like the table still stood between us, and nobody wanted to be the one to lift the plates and see what was rotting underneath. I went back to routine. My job. My list of small, precise duties. I made coffee. I answered emails. I stacked tools in the garage that no one else ever touched. In the absence of family, I filled the days with labor. The kind of quiet work that never gets praised but keeps the world from collapsing. It was 2 days later when I got the first notification. Payment failed. Ethan's housing fund. Then another. Miles. Tutoring invoice past due. And then the one I was waiting for. Home service plan suspended due to verification lapse. Utilities billing redirected. It happened exactly as I expected. Because I was the one who set it all up. The accounts, the auto debits, the plans. The structure beneath the house. The skeleton of their life. That night around 7 my phone rang. Sarah. I let it buzz twice before answering. Michael. Her voice was sharp, but beneath it I heard the first tremor of panic. Did you turn off the accounts? I didn't sit down. I didn't pace. I stood still, phone to my ear, staring at the wall where our wedding photo used to hang. I'd taken it down 2 months earlier when the glass cracked. Funny how no one noticed. I canceled my payments, I said. A pause. Then why? You know why. Silence. You didn't even tell me. They told me I didn't get to decide, I said. So I stopped deciding. Her voice went low, controlled. The tone she used when the boys were in trouble but the guests hadn't left yet. Michael, this isn't just about what they said at dinner. You're punishing them. No, I said. I'm stopping the pretense. You can't have it both ways, Sarah. I can't be the one paying the bills and also the one who doesn't count. She sighed like she was the one who'd been betrayed. They're just boys. They're men when they want rent money and boys when it's time to show respect. That game's over. Her voice cracked then. You're blowing up their lives. No, I said quietly. They just lost the man holding them up. The explosion came from their mouths. I just stepped away from the blast radius. She didn't reply. I let the silence stretch. Let it wrap around her like a coat she couldn't take off. Then I hung up. Not in anger. Just done. The next day the boys called. Ethan first. Hey, he started. Like that single syllable would reset everything. I heard there was a mix-up with the housing payments. Not a mix-up, I said. There was a pause. Okay. Well, whatever it is, can you fix it? They're threatening to cancel my lease. I've only got 2 weeks before the semester starts. I won't be fixing it, I said. Another pause. But you always handle this stuff. Not anymore. What the hell does that mean? It means the man who doesn't get to decide doesn't get to pay either. He exhaled loudly, like I'd just thrown cold water in his face. Are you serious? I am. This is insane. You can't just bail. I didn't bail. Carried you. For years. While your father vanished and your mother looked away. I carried you, and you spat in my face at dinner. That wasn't, he started. But I cut him off. You said I don't get to decide. So now I don't. Simple. He went quiet. I heard the sound of him shifting, the phone scraping his stubble. The air moving like a storm was coming. Then he hung up. Miles tried later that evening. His approach was softer. Hey, Mom said you're not doing the tutoring payments anymore? That's right. He was quiet for a second. I kinda need those. My SAT score. Is now your real father's concern. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he won't. You know that. I know. So why are you doing this? Because it was always a one-sided deal. Because I was the only one showing up. Because your mother let it happen. Because when you were given a choice between kindness and cruelty, you picked cruelty. And now it has a price. You're just mad. No, I said. I'm finally clear. Then I hung up again. That night, no one called. The next morning, Sarah showed up at my place. She used her key. Walked in like nothing had changed. Like we hadn't built a life where she expected me to pay for her sons while she sat silent at their table. I was in the garage. She stood in the doorway like she used to, holding her arms across her stomach, waiting for me to set down whatever I was working on. I didn't. You made your point, she said. I didn't do it to make a point. Then why? I stopped feeding people who bite. They're hurting. They should be. She stepped forward, trying to soften her tone. You can't just cut them off. They're kids. They're grown enough to tell me I have no say. That makes them grown enough to pay their own bills. You don't mean that. I looked at her for the first time in days. Her face was tired. Not from sleep. From pretense. From holding up a fantasy she didn't even believe in anymore. Sarah. I said. I meant every word, and so did they. She wiped her cheek. Not quite crying. Not yet. They're scared. So was I. Every time I took money from one account to cover another. Every time I stayed up late wondering if they'd ever see me. Every time I swallowed my pride so they'd have a father, even if they didn't want one. They didn't know. They didn't want to know. She sat down slowly on the bench beside the tool rack. Her body folded inward like she couldn't hold up her own weight anymore. I never asked you to do all that. I know, I said. You just let me. We sat there in the stale heat of the garage. Tools hanging. Sawdust in the air. A marriage quietly cracking like wood under pressure. She didn't beg. She didn't offer promises. She just sat with her silence. Eventually, she left. No slam. No scene. Just the door clicking shut behind her. And I knew the shift was real. Knew the world I had built, plank by plank, was now breaking apart. Not because I wanted it to, but because I had stopped holding it together. The bills kept rolling in. Notices. Fees. Past dues. And I didn't lift a finger. Let them pile. Let them feel the weight of what I had carried. Because that's what happens when you tell a man he has no say. He learns to let go of responsibility too. No one apologized. Not Ethan. Not Miles. Not Sarah. That's what you need to understand before I tell you how it ended. There were no grand gestures. No teary reunions. No outstretched arms begging for forgiveness. They didn't come back with flowers or cards or even a single word that sounded like regret. Because that's not how people work when they've built their lives on your silence. They don't apologize when the wall comes down. They stand in the dust and wonder why it hurts to breathe. But they felt it. Every inch of it. They felt the absence like a missing floorboard in a dark hallway. Something they never noticed when it was there but couldn't stop tripping over once it was gone. Started small. A missed tutoring session. A meal plan suspended. Miles was the first to buckle. Youngest always folds first. I got a voicemail I never answered. Hey, I just wanted to say I didn't mean that night to go like it did. Things got out of hand. I was just trying to back up Ethan. He's older. He leads. I follow, I guess. There was more. I didn't listen to the rest. Because backing someone up is still a choice. And the moment you make that choice, you also own its cost. Ethan was next. Less soft. More bitter. Sent an email. Subject line. We need to talk. Like he was the one offering me grace. like this was a negotiation instead of a reckoning. I didn't reply. He followed up with a second message. You're really going to ruin everything over one sentence? And I stared at that line for a long time. One sentence. As if that's all it was. As if the rest of it, the silence, the erasure, the years of being treated like a fixture instead of a man, didn't count. Sarah came last. She waited 3 weeks. I think she hoped the dust would settle, that time would dull the edge. That I'd return to the role like a dog who forgot why it left. She came by the house while I was mowing the lawn. Didn't text ahead. Just showed up in that same gray sweater she always wore on bad days. Hands in her sleeves. Shoulders tight. I turned off the mower but didn't walk toward her. She crossed the grass like she didn't belong there anymore. She didn't. That ground was mine now. All of it. Every inch. I want to talk, she said. I let her. She stood 6 feet from me and spoke like she was delivering a eulogy she didn't rehearse enough. I've been thinking a lot, she said. About what happened. About the way the boys acted. About what I didn't say. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because she hadn't said anything real yet. She shifted. Looked down at her shoes like the answers were written on the soles. They're young. They say stupid things. But I should have defended you. I should have said something. Anything. Still I said nothing. They miss you, she tried. They miss what I gave them, I said. Not who I was. Her eyes filled then. Not enough to spill over. Sarah never cried where people could see it. But I saw the gleam. The guilt. The late arriving truth. I want to fix this, she said. No, I replied. You want it to go back. But there is no back. Only forward. And you don't want to walk that road. Then tell me what to do, she whispered. And for a moment I almost did. Almost gave her the list. The apology I wanted. The boundaries I needed. The years I deserved to be seen. But I didn't. Because love born from rescue isn't love. It's dependency. And I was done being their life raft. So I told her the truth. There's nothing to do. Because this isn't about one dinner. It's about a lifetime of being needed but never included. Of being useful but never respected. You married a provider. But you never made space for a father. She opened her mouth. But I didn't let her speak. I showed up. Every time. For your boys. For this house. For a version of family I thought I was earning. But when the moment came to prove it, when it mattered, you let them draw the line. And then you stayed on their side of it. She stepped forward. Just 1 foot. Just enough to feel like it meant something. Michael. But I stepped back. You need to go, I said. And she did. No begging. No scenes. Just a woman walking away from a man she'd never fully claimed. That was the last time I saw her in person. The emails came after. Updates. Please. Hints. But no apologies. One night, months later, I got a letter from the university. Ethan had been suspended. Failure to pay. Miles deferred his first semester. Couldn't secure the funding. They never told me. But someone had to list me as the emergency contact. I threw the letters in the trash. And then came the quiet. Not a cold war. Not a ceasefire. Just a quiet so complete it felt like peace. The house stayed clean. The fridge stayed stocked. No more late-night calls for gas money. No more mystery charges on the shared card. No more rooms full of boys who called me nothing but lived like I was everything. Just silence. And in that silence, I started to rebuild. I changed the locks. Took her name off the mortgage. Called the banks. Updated passwords. Closed accounts. I reclaimed every inch of my life from the hands that once expected it without thanks. People say blood doesn't make a family. That love does. But that's only half true. Because love without respect is slavery. And I was a slave for 15 years. To Sarah. To her boys. To the idea that if I gave enough, endured enough, proved enough, I would finally be accepted. But acceptance never came. Not when I paid the tuition. Not when I fixed the plumbing. Not when I sat through birthdays with their father's name on the cake and my money in the decorations. Not when I stayed. So I left. Not loudly. Not bitterly. Just fully. And now, here's what I've learned. You can't earn your place in a family that's already decided where you belong. You can't force people to see you if they're committed to looking past you. And you sure as hell can't buy love that's only ever been rented out of convenience. So I ask you, was I wrong to walk away? Was I wrong to let the system I built collapse just to prove how much they needed me? Would you have stayed? Would you have kept paying? Kept showing up? Tell me, if you were told to your face that you had no say, would you still sign the check? Would you still carry the weight? Would you still call yourself a father in a house that only ever treated you like a stranger? I did, until I didn't, and I finally learned. The only thing crueler than walking away is staying where you're not wanted.